Hello. Today, I want to tell you the story of the worst video on the internet. So it was back probably around 2012, and online video was way more difficult than it is today. There was no Zoom, there was no Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, YouTube Live, like none of that. You had to have specialized software and it was kind of complicated to use. Even watching video was a little bit challenging. People had to download stuff and sign in, and it was really irritating. The other thing was I could never schedule any webinars or any kind of live stream after about 3 p.m. because when the kids got home from school, the internet just slowed to a crawl. It was terrible. Even if like I would say to my son, okay, I have to go live. You can't go on the computer right now. But the way, because it wasn't like fiber or cable, it was over the phone lines. And so even just everybody in the neighborhood being on the internet just slowed my internet to a crawl. Um, and I remember after the webinar going and looking at the replay and just being horrified. I actually looked around and went, oh my God, this is what my office was like. Um, Actually, here, let me show you. This is a screen capture of what the horrible video actually looked like. So that is me. And it's actually in this office. It's just like a lot of people, when I set up my business, I didn't do any decorating. So I had like the previous owners, this was a nursery. And so it had like a million colors. The lighting you can see was terrible. My lighting's not great today because there's weird things with the sun. But I mean, there it was terrible. I had those big giant headphones, like that we used to have back in the day. Um, I didn't do my hair and makeup. I mean, it was awful. It was terrible. And what's interesting, I like see how blurry that picture was. That actually wasn't the tech because I'm actually using the exact same webcam right now as I was using in that picture. But remember, I said the internet was really slow, really bad. We had bad bandwidth, so everything was blurry. The tech was worse. Um, it was a terrible webinar. Okay, I gotta take that down because that's, like, horrible. I can't even look at it anymore. But the point was that even though the tech was bad, the bandwidth was bad, I looked terrible, the room looked terrible. I mean, I painted my office white just because of that picture, like, it was so awful. In spite of that, I had people show up for that live webinar and it actually converted. I got excellent feedback. People bought stuff. Why? Because it's not about the technology. Hi, I'm Andrea Stenberg, and today I'm talking about story plus video equals an unstoppable personal brand. And I started with that story intentionally because I could have said to you, you know what, video isn't about the tech, it's about, what your content and connecting with people. But that would have been boring, and you probably wouldn't have believed me, and you definitely wouldn't have remembered it. So, before I dive in a little bit more, I would just love to know let me know if you're watching this live or in the replay. And if I say anything that you think, oh, wow, I can use this for my videos and my business, please type it in the chat and share it with other people. That would be amazing. So, the whole point of, this bad video and the story about it is it makes it more memorable when you tell a story. People are more likely to remember what you said than if you share tons of stats and you have a chart and you have beautiful slides and whatever. Having a story makes it more memorable. It also becomes more relatable because particularly for me, I'm helping you learn how to do video. Everybody who's ever done a video has a crappy first or early video. They've got one where the lighting wasn't great, where you didn't look your best, where the tech failed, whatever. And so me sharing that story of what I call the worst video on the internet, it's more relatable. And so if you have a story that you can tell that your audience can relate to and go, "Oh yeah, I've done that." that is way more powerful than having numbers and stats and slides. Um, the other thing about sharing stories, particularly in your videos, is you can build more of a connection with people, especially if you really kind of paint a picture with words of, what was the situation like? What were you feeling? How did it, what happened? And then if you also have visuals like I did where I could, show the worst video on the internet, it really has much more of an impact than if you just stick with factual content. So now, an even bigger plus with telling stories, particularly personal stories, or like business stories, but they're your business stories, is like that story I told about the worst video on the internet. ChatGPT couldn't have written that. They just absolutely couldn't. And so in this day and age where everybody's jumping on the AI bandwagon and using AI to write their marketing copy, write their emails, write their scripts for their videos, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making is they just use the chat GPT and go, okay, yeah, I've got it. And I've done it. And they don't tweak it for their brand, their messaging. And well, I mean, I fully confess, I'm using AI myself, but I'm also Andrea-fying it. I'm taking the AI and then adding a splash of Andrea, and one of the ways to do that is to tell a story. And that story about the worst video on the internet, AI couldn't make that up. Um, another problem with AI, like I make boring titles and subject lines for things, like I just do, and I use AI to try to come up with better ones. But I was doing a webinar a while ago, and I asked AI to come up with some titles, and luckily I Googled them because they had given me a bunch of titles that were absolutely like just 100% plagiarized from my direct competitors. Like a competitor of mine actually had their domain was the title that AI had given me for a webinar. But anyway, I digress. So stories are a way to make you stand out from your competition because there's stuff that the AI can't come up with because it's just 100% you. And that is really the power of the personal brand. And while you can use stories and should use stories in your emails, in your blog posts, in your social media posts, when you combine the story with video and the visuals and your voice and your energy and your personality, it just builds a personal brand that is absolutely unique that no one can copy because it has all the elements that are uniquely you. So, how can you use story in your videos? So one of the simplest ways to do it is so figure out what's the topic of your video. What are you going to be doing? So one of the obvious types of videos for coaches is to teach something like I'm doing here. And so come up with your subject, your title, what you're talking about, and then come up with your main points. So depending on how long your video is and how much detail you're getting into, maybe, like one of my favorite structures is 3 ways to do X. So you come up with your outline. What are the 3 ways to do X? And you can absolutely use AI to help you create your outline, but then look at each of your teaching points and say, okay, is there a story I can tell that illustrates this better or, makes people understand the concept better? So maybe it's a personal story, like me telling the story about the worst video on the internet. Or maybe it can be something that's not directly related, but tells a story. So for example, I wrote an email a while ago about making mistakes, and I told a personal story about making a mistake in my personal life that had nothing to do with business but then related it to the main point of the email. So you can do that with your main teaching points in your video. Another thing you can do you have client case studies or success stories of clients who have done the thing that you're teaching in your video, and tell that story to illustrate what you're trying to convey. And So you start with the outline of what you want to teach and then try to think of a story. And then when you're telling the story, you want to be descriptive and emotional. So, like, if you don't have visuals like I did of, the worst video on the internet where you can actually see, but you can describe the situation, you can describe, what people were looking at. You can evoke feelings, talk about if your feelings. Like, I talked about, oh my god, this is what my office looks like, this is terrible. So you get a chance to get a bit of an emotional feeling for what I'm feeling, and bring in the emotion as well as the sense of place, make people feel like they're there. And that is, how you can structure your videos to make them more engaging, more interesting. And also for those of us who are coaches and course creators, absolutely make them more memorable and more relatable, and for make people more likely to be able to apply if you're teaching something, or encourage them to take action. So that's it for today. I wanted to talk about, personal for a personal brand, stories, personal stories or business stories, client case study stories of you on video makes your brand absolutely unstoppable, because AI can't write those stories. AI doesn't know your stories. They can't write them for you. That comes entirely from you. So, if and I know sometimes stories, coming up with stories and figuring out what's appropriate and what not it's not, can be challenging. So book a free call with me, and I will put it in the chat. The visibility action session. You can absolutely book a call, 30 minutes, complimentary. We'll brainstorm some things. You can ask me if I think the stories are appropriate. We can craft them a little bit. And then, if it makes sense, we can talk about ways I can help you further. But if it doesn't make sense, we can just part as friends. So remember, story plus, your unique stories plus you on video absolutely makes for an unstoppable brand. It makes you absolutely unique. AI cannot write this stuff for you. So I will see you soon, and thank you for joining me.